So welcome everyone. Thanks for attending to this webinar that we're holding, Powering the Change in Uzbekistan, Energy Reforms and Investment Opportunities. We have a distinguished panel of speakers today, both from government and some of the companies who are investing and advising Uzbekistan on their power and energy reforms. Some housekeeping before we begin. There will be a recorded version of this webinar that we will send out to registered users. And should you have follow-up questions or you didn't register, you can get in touch with us by email, and you can reach me at editor@bne.eu at any time. There'll be a question and answer session. We'll keep those till the end. There's a comment box. If you want to ask a question, please write your question in the comment box and we'll deal with them in the question and answer session. Before we start, I thought I'd give a quick recap to what's been going on in Uzbekistan in the energy sector. It can be broadly broken into three large categories: oil and gas, which is mainly about restructuring Uzbekneft, the state-owned oil and gas company, and shearing it of its former sort of ministerial functions so that it becomes a classic exploration and production company. The power sector, half of Uzbekistan's power stations are Soviet legacy and have reached the end of their useful life. So that sector needs significant investment and modernization. And then finally, there's the renewable sector. This is new, and the government has committed itself from the start in order to build significant amounts of renewable capacity and increase the share of renewables over the next 5 years. Last year, the president signed a decree and set up the 5-year plan, energy reform plan, which is well underway. Much of the legislation has been drawn up and is being put in place now. It's being done with the active participation of the IFIs, the international financial institutions, who've been advising and consulting to create a legislative framework that will be recognizable to international investors. At the same time, the unbundling of Uzbekenergo, the state-owned energy power company, has already been completed, which is a major step forward, and broken into the distribution, generation, and transmission parts. This creates the basis for privatization program, which is also on the agenda to start fairly soon. So I think that's it for the overview. A lot of progress has been made. It's been going very fast. The people I talked to have been very excited about what's been going on. With that, we should start with the first speaker. I'd like to invite Saeed Rustamov, who is the ambassador of Uzbekistan to the UK, who's going to make some opening remarks. Mr. Rustamov, the ambassador, has been in the diplomatic corps for 20 years. He set out and started with the US and specialized in those relationships. He's been General Director for Foreign Policy and Strategy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where he's been working on Uzbekistan's relations with the external world and served in several other embassies now in the UK. Mr. Ambassador.
Got it. Ben, thank you very much. So I'm glad to participate in today's event, today's webinar on the Uzbekistan energy sector. And I would like to express my sincere appreciation to organizers, first of all, the Minister of Energy of Uzbekistan, and personally the Deputy Minister Begzod Narmatov for his support of this initiative to organize this event. And of course, to the moderator, Mr. Ben Aris and BNI. And of course, our speakers for their participation and agreeing to share information and experience of their work in Uzbekistan that I think that will be useful to hear today. In my remarks, let me focus on a couple issues. So reforms and opportunities in the energy sector in Uzbekistan, which we are going to discuss today, are the part of the large-scale economic transformation and, in general, overall ambitious program of modernization launched by President Mirziyoyev, and which is being implemented in Uzbekistan since 2017. It's not a cosmetic update, it's real fundamental transformation of the country, starting from modernization of public administration, foreign policy, up to economic liberalization, democratization, ensuring human rights and freedoms. Many things have been done already particularly in transition to free market system, like currency convertibility, like easing burden on business, strengthening transparency and accountability, private property, as well as banking and financial sectors. But much to be done, and Uzbekistan is committed to continue its reforms, even despite negative consequences of pandemic. Why? There is a clear understanding in Uzbekistan that this is the only way to ensure long-standing economic and social development of Uzbekistan and provide opportunities for good life to 34 million strong and predominantly young population of my country. And the second, reforms have shown their effectiveness and gave some results. Of course, this is not only the status of the country of the year by the Economist magazine, which is also, by the way, very important for Uzbekistan, but this is resilience of economy, and we still expect very modest but positive growth of our economy in 2020. That is also projected by international financial institutions like World Bank or ADB. And we expect a strong rebound of our economy to about 5% or even more in 2021. So the results of the reforms are also reflected in the progress of Uzbekistan in international ratings. We are climbing up right now on many international ratings, and this is also the growth of investments and growth of confidence from international community, and of course this is a growth of the trust from Uzbekistan's population. So reforms in Uzbekistan are irreversible and are the integral part of renewed Uzbekistan. There is a very ambitious agenda ahead, like harmonizing national legislation to international standards, like accession to WTO, like creating favorable conditions for investment climate, and further decreasing the presence of and the share of the government in the economy. I would like to mention here recent, and probably this is one of the milestone steps of Uzbekistan's move toward market economy. This is a very large program of wide transformation and privatization of state-owned enterprises, including in strategic spheres like the oil and gas, for example, or energy. According to the just recent presidential decree, so there will be huge transformation of more than 30 large state-owned enterprises. There will be sale of to private investors of more than 60 large backbone industrial enterprises. There will be sale of shares of more than 400 state-owned enterprises, and so on and so on. So there is a big opportunities right now for foreign companies who can also participate in this privatization process. And I take this opportunity to encourage the foreign businesses on the background of current modernization and opening up of Uzbekistan to take the action and to participate in this process. Let me finish my remarks by saying a couple of words about the energy sector. I'm not going to stop it for much time, but I would just want to say that energy sector and reforms in this sector are very vital to the sustainable economic development of Uzbekistan and the solution of many social problems. At the same time, this sector is of great interest for many years. It was and it is for foreign investors, especially British companies and portfolio investors. And some of them are already in Uzbekistan exploring some opportunities for doing business. There is right now a transformation in this sector, big transformation that includes enhancing transparency, implementing international financial reporting standards, to make it more attractive for foreign business in order to bring investment as well as advanced and innovative technologies. there are some improvements, some developments here. For example, the new draft law, which are being developed on PSA mechanisms, production sharing agreements. It's also a very big step forward. It's also, there is a, depending on the progress in transformation in energy sector, there is a potential for sale of state shares, for IPO and the issuance of Eurobonds. Also the big, let's say, the opportunities here. We have also very ambitious national energy strategy aimed at getting, let's say, about a quarter of our electricity production from renewables to 2030. By this time, the consumption, and by this time, the energy consumption, we are going to double. So over the next 10 years, we will anticipate the solar and wind power plant will total capacity of about 8 gigawatts will be built. So it's also with a focus on the, let's say, the very topical right now, the issue of the climate change and low carbon energy. So Uzbekistan is also going through this way to the green energy and low carbon energy. Let me stop here. Ben, thank you very much once again for the opportunity to participate, and I give the floor to you. Thank you.
I'd like to move now to the next speaker, which is Bahram Umarbekov, who's the Deputy Director at the Ministry of Energy, who's in charge of the energy sector reform progress. He's got 21 years of experience of dealing with the energy sector. He's an industry professional, and he's in charge of the power purchase agreements and also talking to the investors and at the same time collaborating with the IFIs. And one of the focuses is setting up PPP deals in order to bring in money to modernize the sector and bring it up to speed. He's worked previously in Uzbekistan, but also in Kazakhstan, Russia, and in Singapore. And he's bringing all that experience back to the Uzbek sector and these power reforms. Mr. Umarbekov, please.
Good part of the day, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor for me to be speaking at this webinar. Thank you very much for your interest in the energy sector of Uzbekistan. We are very delighted that we're in such an exciting times in Uzbekistan, carrying out the reforms, modernizing the power sector in Uzbekistan, and making several projects with private investors and drafting new laws. So in this webinar, I'd like to make my presentation around 3 points. First, I would like to tell you the state of the power sector as of now, as currently, or even as of a year ago. And then I'd like to talk about the reforms, and then what projects we're concluding at this time. So our current capacity, production capacity of power in Uzbekistan is around 15 gigawatts, out of which 8 gigawatts come from old style gas turbines with an efficiency of around 30%. Then we have F-class turbines of 3.6 gigawatts. Then we have hydropower of 1.9 gigawatts, some coal generation of 1.3, and all of that totaling to 15.1. And we have some transmission system and distribution system which are old, which need to be modernized. There are some technical losses that could be prevented by replacing the old equipment. And we have shortage of power. Our economy is growing, and the pace of the growth of electricity production has been slower than the pace of demand. And in order to improve the situation, we have conducted some studies. We have done our plan for the power sector, and by 2030, we plan that we should have around 28, 30 gigawatts of power. We need to upgrade our transmission systems, distribution systems, and all in all, calculations show that we needed around 20 billion United States dollars to be invested into the sector, out of which around 17 was supposed to go for the upgrade in production of power. This is a substantial amount of money compared to the GDP of Uzbekistan, which is kind of around 50, 60 billion United States dollars. And it was like, we're already, we have some government debt, but assuming this debt and assuming that all of this investment would be carried out by the government, would put significant burden on the government budgets, on the taxpayers. And while at the same time, consultants from World Bank, from ADB, from EBRD, they all came up and presented cases in the other parts of the world that this power sector could be all privatized and the free market could be introduced in Uzbekistan, and almost all of that investment could be put on the shoulders of private investors. So this idea was welcomed by the leaders of our country, by the leaders of our government, and the decision was made that we should reform the sector. So we're moving to the second part of my speech is about the reforms. So in order to reform, we have continued our talks with consultants, and we have developed a market concept. We've decided that we will create a free wholesale market with merchant producers, and then we'll also free up the retail sector. So this concept was developed based on this market transition concept. We have drafted a new law on electricity. It went through reading from among other ministries, and we've received their comments. So our plan is by the end of winter to have the new law enacted. At the same time, in order to introduce some new tools, technologies to the grid, to the power system, we're conducting public tenders to upgrade, to bring the SCADA EMS system into the transmission system. And then on the distribution side, we're carrying out the smart meter installation and the new billing systems. We're very excited about this because it will help us also to cut the potential losses in the distribution system. Already half of 7 million meters have been installed, and the computer servers and billing system are already going through the test runs. And we're also collaborating with World Bank to upgrade our grid. We're developing certain master plan, identifying the weak points, and making sure that we don't have any failures in the transmission system in the future when we increase our production capacity. Then we're all developing the grid code. Already we have it in the draft, and it's going through the readings, and after several months we'll have it also enacted, hopefully. And we had the one state-owned company called Uzbekistan Embassy, which owned all the power sector assets in our country. Last year we have split it up into 4 companies, with hydro and thermal power plants being in charge of energy production, and then national electric grids being in charge of transmission, and regional electric networks being in charge of distribution. So these last 2 companies will also be further split. Because they implement 2 functions. First is buying and selling the power right now, and transmitting the power or distributing. In the near future, we will split up. We'll take out this electricity buying and selling from the transmission company. And when we introduced the free retail market, inviting private players, the regional electric grids company will also stop buying and selling the electricity. So all these reforms should help us to cut the deficit in the electricity currently that we have currently in our market. So in the future, we are planning that natural gas powered electricity production will have a capacity of around 15 gigawatts, and then solar PV capacity will be around 5 gigawatts. Hydropower will be around 3.8. We will have some coal production. We will modernize our coal plants, introducing these critical and supercritical coal-fired technologies. And there will be 3 gigawatts of wind by 2030, totaling to 28.4 gigawatts. And we want to increase the power production per capita from the current 1900 kilowatt hours to 3000 kilowatt hours in the future, forecasting that our population will reach around 38 million people by 2030 from its current 33.5 million people. And we plan that the whole wholesale market will be operational around in 3 years by 2023-24, and so will be the retail market. And in order to facilitate the private investors coming into our to the electricity production in Uzbekistan, currently working signing with them power purchase agreements, long-term power purchase agreements for long term on public-private partnership basis. And we already have signed several such projects. For example, the first of which was with Emirati company Masdar on PV production for 100 megawatts. It was the Masdar was a winner of a public tender conducted with the help of IFC, and there was direct negotiation with Total Aram PV plant of 100 megawatts. Then this year in March, we've signed a big contract with Saudi company Aqua Power for to construct combined cycle gas turbine plant with a capacity of 1500 megawatts. And then in April, we signed with Aksa Energy, Turkish company, also a gas-fired plant, 240 megawatts. Then in June, we signed another PPA with Masdar on wind project, 500 megawatts. Then in September, we signed with Chingiz Energy, also gas-fired plant for 240 megawatts. And we have several other direct negotiations going on, for example, with the same Aqua Power, but now this time on wind for 1,000 megawatts. And we have 4 public tenders currently running with IFC, Sirdarya CCGT project, up to 1,600 megawatts. And with IFC, 2 PV stations for the construction of 2 PV stations, 200 megawatt each in Samarkand and Jizak regions, and with ADB for 200 megawatt PV in Surkhandara in the southern region of Uzbekistan, and with EBRD for 100 megawatts in the western, in Karakalpakstan, western part of Uzbekistan. So this is very exciting. As I said, these are very exciting times for Uzbekistan. We're going with big steps for the reforms and on our PPP projects. And we welcome investors to come and invest into Uzbekistan's power sector and take an active part in developing it. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be glad to answer your questions in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramabekov. Like you say, going to Tashkent, I was there last year, and it's really frenetic, the pace of reforms. Everybody is talking about all of the initiatives that are being put in place, and particularly with the energy sector, it seems to be going very fast indeed. The progress that you've made in the last just couple of years is really extraordinary. In order to pick up the theme, we're joined from Tashkent by the Deputy Energy Minister, Mr. Bekshot Naramatov, who's going to go into some more detail and hopefully the bigger picture of what the government's long-term plans are in terms of energy reforms. Minister.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ben. First, I would like to thank His Excellency Mr. Ambassador Said Rustamov for such a great intro to this forum, and I would like to thank Organized for setting up such an event. Indeed, Ben, there are a lot of things going on in Uzbekistan, especially in economy sector, and on top of that, on energy sector, because energy sector is the locomotive of the economic growth. Without energy, it's hard for economy to grow. And we're taking a number of steps, and Mr. Umarbek just talked about the power sector. I'd like to emphasize what has been done on the gas sector. Recently, we also held the roundtable with the international financial institutions to discuss the first milestones that we have achieved, and then what we're going to have in the future. Main idea of the reforms is actually based on two ideas: is to provide visibility, allow me to say, the transparency to the sector, to bring the transparency, and instead of fighting mosquitoes, we want to dry the swamp. That's the first idea. Second, instead of running after butterflies, we want to create a garden instead of that. So current system of gas supply is quite complicated, and it's still has some elements of post-Soviet system. So before reform started, we had a single company that handled the production, transportation, and distribution. As a result of reforms, like in the power sector, we have created 3 companies that are responsible for each for their own areas. For example, Uzbek Neftegaz is responsible for production. Uztransgaz responsible for gas transportation, main gas supply lines, and Hududgaz Taminat, which is a regional gas supplier distributor, is responsible for distributing the gas through their network to the end users, likes of CNG stations, restaurants, households, and so on. By doing that, we clearly identified the borders of responsibility for each party. And the main exporter and importer of the gas was also the Uzbek Neftegaz. Now we have, in a transition period, we have Uztransgaz, who will be responsible for importing and exporting gas through their network. And Hududgaz Taminat is now supplying households, as I mentioned before, and using using 3 different tariffs for supplying the gas. So we have, since, as I said, we have some elements of post-Soviet system, and we have a heavy social burden on the government companies to provide heavily subsidized prices for the population, and which is now about 38 cents. And then we have a strategic plants, such as thermal plants, CCGTs, which are supplied at about 65 cents. And we have other commercial users, which likes of construction material manufacturers, CNG stations, and so on, it's about $100, $1 per cubic meter. So in each story, it creates some confusion and lacks the transparency when it comes to the distribution networks, whereas you didn't have infrastructure that would be up to the standards that would attract investors into the sector. And thus we taking some challenging steps, because we want to change something that was existed for many years. And it has to go through not only the reforms that we want to do in the system, but also in the mindset of the population as well, because we have to get used to the fact that there will be private companies, that will be competition, that will be there will be the prepayment models, and there will be changes in the price, because we need to, it will be regulated by the market. But we're taking very careful steps, and we're taking following reforms in key areas. The first is a legal and regulatory reforms that we're going to take. It will take, and we want to finish that part by 2023. By 2023, where we want to review we want to create a single law on hydrocarbons. It's a type of combination of subsoil law in US and a combination of other associated laws. A new gas law should be adopted, and the law will include the law that will introduce midstream, downstream gas regulator responsibilities, unbundle Uzbekistan from supply, and its role will be only transmission and storage system operator, and it will be defined in the law. Define the rights and obligations of natural gas market participants. Foresee a promotion of regional gas market integration. By 2023, we'll adopt the Code of Natural Gas Networks for transparent and equal access of consumers to the network, the mechanism of energy distribution during the transmission and storage, and gas tariff methodology. Second is financial reforms, which will be completed by 2024, and it will mainly related to the formation of tariffs for transportation and distribution, and the gas, natural gas itself, and the reforms of the market. The second key area is the reforming of the markets, and to have clear regulations and transparent, adding the transparency and delegating the delegation of responsibilities. It will enable us to transform Uztransgaz and regional gas distributor, and also enable us to establish a new distribution system operators, and enabling to create PPPs. Another one is institutional and governance reforms. It will allow us, it will be done in 2021, and enable us to establish an independent natural gas market regulator in accordance with the international practice. The Ministry of Energy will be responsible for following key roles in the gas sector: set vision and strategy for the sector, create legislation and set agreements framework, and external engagements. Next one is corporate, organizational, and governance reforms. By 2021, we will introduce a corporate governance code for all COEs active in the gas sector. Capabilities of SAMA should be expanded. The role of the state ownership unit includes oversight over implementation of corporate governance code, appointing capable boards of directors, setting targets for and reviewing performance of sectors SOEs, and ensuring board decisions are in line with the sector strategy. Both governments of SOEs should lift towards international best practices and achieve total independence and separation between policy and operations. So, and there are additional key reforms that we have to carry out is digitization, whereas we have to prepare the infrastructure so that we could see the balance from the well where the gas is produced to the end user, so that it will have a transparent system of the flow of the resource on the pipeline. And also the human capital reforms. We need to reestablish the competency management systems, and we need to close the gap between the schools, universities, and HR system of the companies. And also, I mean, it includes the big reforms in HR as it is now in the world, not as we call it. The previous system would look like not as an HR but hire and fire, and then we lost the competency management, and I think that we're gonna go. It will be one of the key reforms that we are undertaking, that we are involving in the sector, such companies as Next Network of Excellence and Training, and we are engaging with IFP in that areas to increase the technical competence of the employees. And of course, greening of energy supply. We are working very hard on setting up the new norms for the use of natural gas as a resource, and moving towards using more energy efficient technologies. For example, Mr. Umar Bekov have mentioned it, introducing higher efficiency CCGTs instead of all 30% old turbines with 30% efficiency. Now we'll be burning same amount of gas, but we'll be producing twice as much power Also, we're going to introduce green technologies through the, as I said, new regulatory norms. It has been calculated, I think, that Uzbekistan is using 4 times more energy to heat 1 cubic meter of space, which means that the new norms will dictate that more use of energy efficient technology throughout the economy and also at the households. And government will be supporting these notions through special funds to support. As a result of reforms, we will have such system that where it will be driven by a demand, and Ministry of Energy's responsibility and the regulators' Ministry of Energy's responsibility will be supply as much gas as it necessary for the economy. And the previous system was that the energy balance was formed through availability of the internal resources. 99% of the resources were supplied internally. And we're looking at the system which will, the economy will tell us how much energy resources they need to sustain the growth at a certain rate, and we will have to supply, if needed, import the gas to sustain the economical growth. So that's pretty much it. So the main sectors will be privatized, and we will see in near future private utility companies, and I think, and also the producers. Many things will come as long as we will be able to cooperate with international financial institutions and consultants. I think that the challenge is that we want to achieve something that has been done in other countries in 15 years, in 5 years. So that's pretty much it. Thank you very much, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Minister. That was very interesting. And we're already getting questions about the privatization schedule, what have you, but we will deal with that in the Q&A part. So the next speaker I'd like to invite is Nigora Ebadova. She works for Enter Engineering and has 10 years experience there, which is one of the largest contractors in Uzbekistan, already actively involved in building and putting together several energy projects. She's also in charge of strategy for new projects at Enter Engineering, oversees the implementation of those projects, and looks to build long-term partnerships with clients. She heads an expert group at the company as well, where they work out the strategy going forward. And she has a degree in philology from the University of Tashkent, where she studied Iranian and English before doing a degree in management and economics at the Russian President's Academy. So, Nigora, if I'd like to hand over to you. Nigora.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me tell you the story how about the company which I'm working in for more than 8 years, regarding Enter Engineering and our experience of work in Uzbekistan and making investments in our company and in infrastructure, which give us the opportunity to work efficiently in energy sector of Uzbekistan. Enter Engineering, like a brand, was established and founded in 2012. While we were preparing our strategy for development and for growing of the company, we acknowledged that Uzbekistan has very good opportunities for EPC competence growing, and many upstream projects on the biggest fields of Uzbekistan, like Kandim, Gisar field, and Ustyurt field, were coming to the actually final stage, and the time of midstream and downstream have started. So we acknowledge that there's a very good chance for us to grow the company in Uzbekistan, because Uzbekistan has a very good location in Central Asia. It has a very good infrastructure from the transportation point of view. And our initial plan was to make the actually investment in the local infrastructure and to localize as much as possible our company in Uzbekistan. So we have acknowledged that we need to make some investment programs in order to be very competitive and in order to meet the very tough schedules, which are very typical for Uzbekistan for implementing big investment projects, and to meet the requirements of the big contracts. So our big investment was made to obtain our own fleet of modern construction equipment, which we currently have more than 2,000 units, and it is all located in Uzbekistan, and it's working on our projects. And we also have more than 20,000 employees. 90% of them are local, and so we found that we have a good opportunity to grow the competence of the local engineers, of the young local engineers, and we have created the special program for admission of the, let's say, trainees and the high potential young Uzbekistan engineers, and then give them the opportunity to grow with us. And of course, we have the international team for project management and for management of the company. When we realized that we have quite a big understanding about the some constraints considering the location of Uzbekistan, and that we have no access to the sea, and we should bring some big portion of equipment and long lead items or other pieces of the critical equipment which dramatically could impact on the schedule of the project. we decided to create the production bases near the big fields in Uzbekistan, which give us the opportunity to mitigate the risks of the delays and to bring many of those equipments beforehand. And we also decided to maintain the shops which can be used for assembling and for some welding works, and that it will give us the comfort. So we have now big production bases in Bukhara region, in Karshi region, in Surkhandarya region. And currently our company has already completed 32 projects in industrial and civil construction. Mostly we have experience of working in oil and gas industry in Uzbekistan at the biggest fields in Gisar and Kandem field. And now we have also some projects in chemical industry. And considering the mentioned by the previous speakers from Minister of Energy about the plans for increasing the investment program and having the big pipeline of the projects which are under the development stage now, we see the good opportunities for us to continue our growth and our presence in the EPC market and to expand our presence not only in oil and gas industry, but also continue to present ourselves in chemical industry and maybe to obtain some projects in the future bids in power industry. When we have started our activity in Uzbekistan, we started in the role of subcontractor to big EPC contractors, which are traditionally working in the local market. These are Korean and Japanese EPC contractors. And by the time being, so after several years, we have enough references and competences, and after all investment programs has been fulfilled, we start to create consortiums. And now mostly we are acting as a consortium member or as a general contractor. We can mention that all the investment projects in Uzbekistan are being realized based on international standards. And they have very big and very strict regulations regarding the complying to the ESG principles, which is also among the priorities of our company. So we are fully acknowledging and working based on the standards which usually we have in our contracts, like IFC and World Bank requirements. So we have a special dedicated team which take care about the compliance of the activity of the company on the fields to the environmental standards. We have obtained all the necessary international certificates. And usually when we perform our projects in different locations of Uzbekistan, we try to be very much accommodated with the local communities and to make the possible support to the local communities. And the participation in the social projects or participation in the charity projects, this is a very big priority of our company. So during our operations, we have built orphanage houses for the children with special demands. We have also built some special entities for the elder children with special demands. And we are planning to continue our support in this regard. Last year, our company also started to support the international educational program for United World Colleges. There were first 6 students in Uzbekistan that were selected by the international committees and international assessors, which we fully support and sponsor their education in the well-known international institutions. And we're also having a plan to continue all that. And to do all these things, we see the big opportunities in Uzbekistan for further growth of our company and expansion of our activities in other sectors. So we start to do some very interesting works in civil sector. So we are proud to say that we built a very beautiful and remarkable complex in Tashkent, Humo Arena, which gives also the good potential for the increasing of winter sports in Uzbekistan. Now our company is engaged in construction of Samarkand Touristic Center, and we see that the potential of our presence in civil construction market is also very promising. So we are working here for more than 8 years, and we hope to stay here as many years as we can have these opportunities, and to grow not only from the point of view of portfolio, revenues, but also grow as from the point of view of our competence, making the interesting partnerships and participate in the mentioned above also the green energy projects, which are, I think, very, very important and promising for Uzbekistan and for our motherland. And I think that this is a good opportunity to monitor all that changes and reforms, and also to see the projects, very large scale projects, which are very different from other Central Asian countries and even, let's say, Russian market, which are now ongoing and which are now being announced. And with the good experience of the customers and clients to make the good development of the projects with the proper financing. So this is our, let's say, enter engineering at a glance and its experience in Uzbekistan so far.
Thank you very much for that. That was very interesting. There's a lot to do here, and the foreign investors are already arriving, which is a testament to the speed and extent of the reforms that have already been made. Now we're going to move on to Tom Tierling, who's the Executive Director of Business Development at ACWA Power, for another look at how the foreign investors and the power companies are getting involved in Uzbekistan. Has 22 years of experience in the power sector, development of new power developments, also desalination, and has worked in Central Asia, Turkey, and Africa, organizing projects, project origination, and also the negotiations that go together with that in terms of setting up a project. Tom, please take it away. What do you give us your impressions of the changes and the speed of development in Uzbekistan?
Well, thank you very much, Ben, and thanks. It's an honor to be invited to talk here at this webinar. Let me maybe give in 30 seconds a quick overview on who we are, Aqua Power, because then that will give you a better view on the perspective that we give as that I give as a foreign investor in Uzbekistan. So Aqua Power is a Saudi Arabia power and water company. We are a company that, when I talk only of the power, that develops, owns, invests in, and operates over the long term power generation plants. We have today approximately almost 38,000 megawatts of installed capacity in a number of companies. So in a number of countries. We are obviously very active in the Middle East. We are present in Africa, and we are present in Asia. Our business model is long-term, power generation under long-term power purchase agreements on a limited recourse or non-recourse project finance basis. So with our projects, we also bring always international finance institutions and international commercial banks. In Uzbekistan, as Mr. Umarbekovich already mentioned, we have signed in March a power purchase agreement and an investment agreement for a 1,500 megawatt high efficiency gas-fired power plant. And we are currently also working on a wind project. Now, I have been coming to Uzbekistan a lot since 2019. I had been in Uzbekistan way back, way before the reforms started. So I was a bit hesitant coming to Uzbekistan in 2019 because I didn't remember it as an investor-friendly country, or a country that was attracting or where foreign investments and private investment was possible. And I have been hugely surprised since I've been here. As I said, I've been here many times, and I'm here again today. And it's very obvious that Uzbekistan has become a very dynamic, a very open country, offering an increasingly stable investment climate through a rapid and impressive reforms in a number of sectors, including in the power sector. And as His Excellency the Ambassador mentioned before, these reforms are irreversible. And when you're here in the country and you're working in the country, you can really feel that these reforms are indeed irreversible. It's not the trial and error. It's really the reforms are there. There is a clear target, and there is a clear buy-in, and that's very important. There's a clear buy-in at all levels in the population, in the administration, in the ministries, from top to bottom, from bottom to top. And obviously that gives a lot of comfort when you come here as a foreign investor. For us, of course, what's very important as a power company is that Uzbekistan has a very thriving power sector with, and you've already heard, with massive investment opportunities in the power sector. When we look at, whenever you go to a country and when you enter into a country for the first time, there are a number of boxes that you want to tick, right? The country needs to comply with a number of criteria before you decide really to start developing, spending time, spending money, and finally take an investment decision to invest in a project, to build a project, and to operate a project over the long term. Because once again, when we enter into a country, we enter into the country for 25 years, 30 years, not just for 1 year, for 1 year or 2 years to construct and leave. And what you can see is that Uzbekistan ticks a lot, if not all, of those boxes. And just to name a couple of them. First, you always look to the political stability of the country. You can see both historically, but definitely also looking forward, you see an important political stability. When I say looking forward, you don't see any signs of any risk of political instability in this country. Secondly, a very important factor also is the rule of law. It's true that Uzbekistan has started reforming only in 2016, which is very, very recent. But you see, as already mentioned, an increasingly stable investment climate, and you see an increasingly stable regulatory framework as well. You can imagine that there are a huge number of new laws that have been passed, that have been voted, and there's still regulatory reforms, legal reforms that are ongoing. But what has been put in place is a framework, a legal framework, a regulatory framework, which is generally in accordance with international standards, which is robust, and particularly very important, which you notice is continuously monitored, right? Continuously monitored and is adjusted when there is, for example, when there are certain incorrect or inefficiencies in the framework. The country, the ministries, the decision makers look into how it has to be improved, take advice from investors, especially take advice from the international finance institutions just like IFC, Asian Development Bank, EBRD, take those into account very seriously and will adjust the framework. In the same sense, you see a very good protection of foreign investments. There is an investment law, which is favorable. At least as favorable to something that you would see or you would expect to see as a foreign investor. There is a PPP law, public-private partnership law. In the investment framework offers currency convertibility, offers guarantee for transfer of funds. All of these, of course, very important when you come in as a foreign investor and you bring along international financial institutions. Another box that is ticked is, and we've heard, it's a growing economy. It's a country with a growing population, a growing economy, which then leads on its turn also to a growing power demand. very important again for a company that invests in the power sector. You want to be sure that what you build, there is demand for for what you're generating, this demand for the electricity, and that and that increasing power demand or the increasing need for new installed power generation capacity comes, as we already heard again, not only from the fact that there is a growing demand, but also and to a big extent also because there is a lot of old generation capacity that exists today that needs urgent replacement. And then a last box that I can tick also, and once again I think it's an important one for power developer, is that there has been a clear choice, a clear decision to move from an EPC structure to an IPP or PPP structure. So there has been a clear decision that it's no longer the state-owned companies that are going to build the new capacity, bar perhaps a couple of exceptions, but generally, there is a clear decision going forward only to work with IPPs or PPPs, independent power projects, where there are for investors, local or foreign, who come and invest and build the new power capacity, conventional or renewable, under long-term agreements. So that choice is very important, gives a lot of comfort, and it helps also in the implementation of the project, because once again, this choice for an IPP is also bought in. There is a clear buy-in from the different actors in the power sector. Obviously, the Ministry of Energy, but also the grid transmission company, local players, and so on and so forth. In doing so, in choosing for an IPP structure, or an IPP model rather, I believe that the government of Uzbekistan has taken a smart move to kick off attracting new investors in the power sector through a number of pilot projects on the basis of direct negotiations, and I will get back to these direct negotiations, while in parallel building a robust tender framework, and also thinking on what to do in the future by working on potentially, or probably more than potentially, moving towards more a merchant market in the mid or longer term. It's a smart move, we believe, to start with direct negotiations, because direct negotiated deals obviously very often are on a fast-track basis, and definitely what we can see in Uzbekistan, they are on a fast-track basis. We already understood that there's a huge need for additional capacity and for replacement capacity. So very important to bring online new capacity on a fast-track basis. By doing so, also Uzbekistan still being a relatively new country for investments. Once again, reform started only in 2016. The country only opened since 2016 to foreign investment. Uzbekistan has, by doing so, attracted a number of big, reputable developers and operators in the power sector, bringing along with them international finance institutions, international commercial banks, showing the trust that those in both the investors but also the international financing community is building in Uzbekistan, and showing the way actually for future investors to come when the tendering starts to is in full speed. And finally, I think it's also important to do this, to start to open the power sector on the basis of direct negotiations, because these are the first projects. In the implementation of those projects, those developers, those operators will be confronted with actually the developers are bringing something new to the country, right? So one thing is obviously discussing, negotiating with the Minister of Energy, Minister of Finance, Minister of Investments. These are all people, they have been exposed to international financing structure, have been exposed on how this is done on an international level. But then you have to start to implement your project, right? So you have to cut through the red tape, which is not used, the bureaucracy at various levels, at national level, regional level, local level, that is not used to seeing foreign investors coming into the country, implementing a project. So by pushing through by means of with these pilot projects, there is a lot that people at different levels will get used to these foreign investors. Regulations will probably be adjusted in order to make them more flexible, in order to cut the red tape. So once again, very smart move. And what we have seen in Uzbekistan in respect of these pilot projects is that they have been granted, they have been awarded on a relatively transparent basis, with quite a degree of competitiveness. So it's not because it's direct negotiation that there is no competitiveness. There have clearly been competition. Again, very importantly, they have been subjected to a very thorough review process. Yeah, these are not the fact of awarding a project to one company or another company is not something that has been done it's not a one-man show. It's not one minister or one ministry that has decided this. This has been a subject of thorough review by a large number of ministries, by a large number of state agencies. I'm just saying this in order to show how seriously the whole process has been taken from day one. So just to conclude, once again, Uzbekistan, very dynamic, very interesting, a lot of opportunities, definitely in the power sector. But you've heard Deputy Minister Normatov also speaking about the gas sector, where I believe and I understand the same level of international practice, international standards are applied. Thank you.
Yeah, your point about the stability and the regulation, international standard. And I was talking to the EBRD about the reforms, and clearly the government has spent a lot of time not just asking for aid, but taking advice and trying to build a regulatory environment that is recognizable to international investors. And then that will hopefully ease the whole process of bringing in money and investment in order to get all these things built. Moving on, we're going to turn now to Shozi Jaferi, who's from the UK Department of Trade and Industry. Of course, the reforms are significantly large. The projects on offer are significantly large, attracting the interest of international companies and governments too. And I believe that Shozi, who's actually at home and having the same sort of internet problems that I am, is not going to turn his camera on, and he complains he's got roadworks outside, so please excuse the background noise, but has a presentation on the progress of reforms, which he's going to share with us. Shozi?
Good afternoon. Thanks, Ben. Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks, Ben, for inviting me to be on this panel. There's some really great presentations already from your distinguished speakers, particularly like the fact that there was such a focus on green energy. And like Tom, who just spoke there, I've been traveling to Uzbekistan since 2003, both for vacations and for business. But I had quite a gap until I traveled back last year in 2019. And the pace of change and the reforms that have taken place have been astonishing. So I'm always pleased to be able to speak on Uzbekistan. It's a country I know reasonably well and have enjoyed being in. Can we get the next slide, please? Thank you. To begin with, I just wanted to put up this slide showing the topics I'll be covering today. I'll try and touch on COP26, energy transition, and our own clean growth agenda. As well as the UK positioning itself as a leader in developing things like energy storage and electrical distribution solutions. And I'll touch on some of the specific areas where we might collaborate with Uzbekistan. Next slide, please. So introduce myself properly. I'm one of the energy specialists working at the Department for International Trade. I'm responsible for supporting UK hydrocarbons and renewables energy companies to win business in overseas markets. In the context of today's webinar, DIT's aim is to help position the UK as the partner of choice for low carbon and renewable energy businesses in Uzbekistan. Next slide, please. So as some of you will be aware, the UK is hosting COP26 next November, and we also hold the presidency for the next G7 summit as well. This really gives us an ideal platform to push the clean energy agenda. And the UK is very much aiming to use these leadership roles to deliver on commitments to develop a green economy. In fact, acting on climate change, including through our legally binding net zero commitment, remains very much a key priority. And as the Prime Minister recently stated, part of our COVID-19 recovery, we're aiming to build back better and base our recovery around supporting the development of a fairer, greener, and more resilient global economy. We'll continue to champion this approach, including obviously through our forthcoming G7 and COP26 presidencies. But for the UK, renewable energy and other forms of clean technology, they play a key role in our country's development and also towards global environmental efforts as well. And we're keen to work together with you to develop the clean energy sector in Uzbekistan. And we're already actively engaging on how we might support and improve the local regulatory framework. Next slide, please. So as many of you will already know, the UK has a world-leading oil and gas supply chain that has been built up over a period of some 50 years. I guess throughout that evolution, the supply chain has excelled in a number of areas, including technical, operational, commercial, contractual innovation, and consequently, it's well positioned to deliver across the value chain. But looking forward, many companies operating in the oil and gas sector are thinking seriously about the long-term price of commodities and, of course, the need to work to a cleaner, greener business model. And we've heard some of that already from some of the speakers. What that means is that risky hydrocarbons projects that require major investment and are expected to deliver a relatively good rate of return are probably going to be shelved until probably at least the time when the higher demand returns and commodity prices start to rise. We've already seen companies such as BP. They've already announced drastic changes to diversify their portfolio and increase investment in non-oil and gas projects. They've stated by 2025, their plan is that more than 20% of their capital is likely to go into what the company calls transition businesses. And as you can see from this slide itself, many of the world's leading EPC companies are actively building their own energy transition strategies to position themselves for emerging industries, things like CCUS, solar, wind, and probably a slightly longer term drivers towards hydrogen. But alongside our oil and gas heritage, the UK is also a leader in low carbon energy. Of course, many of the areas in which the oil and gas sector in the UK is internationally recognized can be transitioned into these growing energy segments. These include project management, major contracting, design engineering, asset and operational management, design and manufacturing of advanced equipment, research and development, training and education, and things like professional and financial services as well. Next slide, please. So building a cleaner, greener, more sustainable British economy is central to our commitment to making the UK carbon neutral by 2050. And the government's investing billions in achieving this goal. It includes massive government spending on a rollout of super fast electric vehicle charging network. And we're looking to extend the plug-in grant schemes for ultra-low emission vehicles through to 2023. We're also looking to establishing a world-class carbon capture and storage industry as well. And of course, Britain already has the largest offshore wind generation capacity in the world, with around 10 gigawatts in operation off our coast and plans for much bigger growth in the future. But looking globally, it's estimated that there's going to be something like $15 trillion worth of investment expected to be made in new power capacity by 2050. It's interesting to note that experts say that around $11 trillion of this is expected to go into renewables. Next slide, please. The first area I wanted to speak on was electrical networks. With more energy coming from renewable sources, this has created a certain amount of intermittency problems, and in certain overseas markets, distributed generation sources like solar are causing issues that the UK has already gone through, and where we've subsequently developed really good experience of managing this. We've invested heavily in smart grids, and our regulatory leadership in particular has put the UK very much at the forefront of smart grids and network development. And I think at this point, it's probably important to note that electrical networks cut across the other renewable sectors as well. And along with our expertise in more traditional grid setups. The UK also has expertise in the design and delivery of off-grid and mini-grid systems as well, where small-scale distributed generation such as rooftop solar, which I know is of interest in Uzbekistan, can be integrated with storage solutions to produce electrically self-sufficient systems, which really can be quite attractive as a proposition where there's no reliable alternatives. Next slide, please. And as you can see from this slide, UK expertise resides across the spectrum of activity for electrical networks. The UK manufactures components for use on transmission and distribution networks and can offer consultancy and delivery service right across the entire value chain. Next slide, please. So moving on to electrical distribution, our investment into smart grids and the regulatory leadership we've introduced has very much put the UK at the very forefront of smart grid and network development. We're talking here about more than just the equipment we install, but this also covers our overall approach to system design and regulation. The segment is supported by introducing a healthy, competitive regulatory environment from which the UK has built up a strong community of innovators whose assets are exportable in terms of knowledge and expertise. And I think, you know, many countries are seeing that their networks are aging and network owners are having to focus more on maintenance. This is very much another core UK strength that we have and can support Uzbekistan with. Next slide, please. So lastly, a few words on energy storage. It's great to see investment growing in solar and wind projects in Uzbekistan, but these power generation sources can have some drawbacks because of the intermittent nature of the natural resources they're derived from. Energy storage solutions, therefore, great at helping electricity system operators offer flexibility of service that's required to operate an efficient modern grid. UK, we've been through this and built a strong understanding of how grid scale energy solutions can be integrated into existing electrical systems. This puts us in a good position to support international markets such as Uzbekistan, where you have your own decarbonisation plant. So as an example of the leading position we're taking in energy storage, the UK is now home to Europe's largest battery storage project. The Manesi storage project in southwest England, it's already secured planning consent and grid connection for 150 megawatts. And it will use lithium iron phosphate and if I'm saying this right, ternary lithium battery technology. The 100 megawatt first stage is due to enter service by the end of 2020. Next slide, please. Finally, I just wanted to congratulate Uzbekistan for your efforts in developing your clean energy sector and for your forward thinking. In my view, Uzbekistan is very much a green beacon in the region, and the UK is very keen to help and support you wherever we can. Thanks very much for listening to me, and I'm sure there may be some questions later that I can help with.
Shozin, thank you very much for that presentation. Very interesting, lots of work to do, and it seems that the UK has a lot to offer in terms of expertise. We're running a bit over time, but I think we're going to push through. We have one last speaker, Ina Olenik, who's from Deutsche Bank, and of course, a big part of all of these projects is going to be how to pay for them. She comes to this with a financier's point of view, project finance, raising investment, and getting the money together to pay for this investment. Ina, if I can hand over to you and you can give your perspective on how this part of it will go.
Thank you. Yes, actually, it's interesting. Quite a lot of speakers already raised a lot of points which are very important for the financing community as well. Indeed, I'll try to be brief, so not to repeat the same what has been said before. Actually, as Deutsche Bank, we've been active in the country since the 90s. In fact, we had an office opened in the country in 1993, and now we have a representative office still. Being a global bank, we focus on international operations, so which then predominantly would cover either exports out of Uzbekistan or imports into Uzbekistan. So in that regard, already since 1993, we've been facilitating a lot of trade operations in which Uzbek banks have been involved, and we have been providing trade finance lines to enable such transactions. Obviously, if you look at ambitions which Uzbekistan has now, and we are aware of them, and in fact we monitor them, and we are quite excited about the developments in the country, and we would like to be part of that as well. So if you look in the ambitions of the country, which all the previous speakers in fact so eloquently outlined, there is really a lot to be done, and this main purpose is either to upgrade or increase the efficiency, as well as build new capacities. And okay, in today, I guess the focus is on energy sector. So where institutions like Deutsche Bank can help. As I was already mentioning, we are a global institution, and I would in fact imagine a lot of similar institutions like Deutsche Bank would have a similar view. So we would focus at facilitating either import or exports. And that in itself can also be split, I guess, in two parts. One can be short-term financing instruments, which could enable more of a flow products. In other words, either purchases or sales which happen on a regular basis. And often such facilities are actually done by involvement of local banks. So the lines are presented to the local banks, and the local banks use such lines, such credit lines, in order to enable this sort of operations. But then there are more strategic medium to long-term financings, which actually, as I just mentioned, a lot of speakers already referred to in the earlier presentations. And these medium to long-term financings would be, in fact, used to build new capacities in energy sector, in renewable sector, to upgrade the existing capacities, to make them more energy efficient. And such type of facilities will most likely or often involve purchasing of equipment produced in, it doesn't matter, European, neighboring Asian country. And that equipment would then be delivered and installed in Uzbekistan. Or sometimes there are various exports which are going out of Uzbekistan, and the financing is based on the basis of such export flows and the underlying. So what we as an institution, for example, are very active in arranging type of financing. The first part where the equipment is imported into Uzbekistan. So this type of financing are often implemented using support of export credit agencies of the country where the equipment is produced and purchased. For example, if there was a green energy project or new wind farm being constructed in Uzbekistan, it's possible such equipment would come from another country. So we as Deutsche Bank would then arrange a facility which would cover financing of the equipment as well as some construction local costs. And that financing would also be supported by the export credit agency of that country, whatever that country may be. We actually work globally across the globe. So whether it's in Europe or Asia or US or any other market, for us, it doesn't matter, although obviously we are a German institution. Then there are also and this type of financing would tend to be medium to long term. So anything between, let's say, 5, 10, 15 years. And depending on the actual project, an involvement or support from the state organizations may be required, although not necessary. It really depends on the project and the underlying it. If the project itself has a very social context, then it's likely yes. Otherwise, obviously, we would always look at and assess the financing and the counterparty risk based on its own merits. And then there are also financings which are a bit shorter nature. So it's more, I would call it medium term, anything between 3 and 5 years. And this type of financing would be based on export flows out of Uzbekistan. So whereby the financing would be provided and as a security, export flows would be assigned to the lenders. And this type of financing can be presented by, for example, Deutsche Bank bilaterally, but can also be formed as part of a larger syndicate whereby we would bring partner banks in, and the amount obviously can be fairly significant. There are different variations of the same structure, but as a principle, that could be bilateral syndicated facility based on export flows. There could also be just a syndicated loan, which is not involving export flows. And of course, as already again, some of my speakers mentioned before, Eurobond issuances are a very convenient instrument. And I'm sure since Sovereign has already issued its first instrument quite some time ago, the market would be open for corporate and private or quasi-sovereign entities as well. So then if you look at, there are also some certain projects, especially when it comes to efficiency, infrastructure projects where development financial institutions like IFC, like the World Bank, like EBRD would be involved. And we as a global commercial bank, we tend to also often be part of such projects and either arrange the projects with the DFIs or participate in them. So then I guess when I was thinking, okay, what is the requirement? Because of course there are always, it's interesting to discuss the projects and what benefit they will bring, but indeed they need to be financed. So it's undeniable the country has gone through significant transformation already, and there are a lot of improvements have been done, and I think all the speakers today acknowledged have been implemented already. And in order to keep doing the same, and especially again, looking from a just financing perspective, a couple of things are very, very important. So I'll just mention them very briefly. One, of course, it's very important for financial institutions to be able to assess all the risks in the transaction. And these risks involve stability, political, legal, as well as credit risk, as well as the overall underlying risk of the project itself. And I think I'm not going to spend time on stability, political and legal risk because all other speakers have already outlined that. But from credit perspective, it's important that international banks have access to the unified data. And for that, what that means is for us, it's the financial reporting in accordance with the FRS statements, because this is the system which is used globally in the whole world. And obviously, in order for us to assess the credit counterparty risk, this is also what is required. I'm also aware that a lot of entities in Uzbekistan are already very actually advanced in that process, and then some of them are more advanced, less, but definitely this is something which is already underway. And then there is one more element which I personally find really interesting, and it's a separate topic on its own, but I'll just spend a few moments on it. It's an ESG element. Okay, we've all referred, again, different speakers today to it in some shape or form: clean energy, climate change. Essentially, what ESG means, it's environmental, social governance. This is indeed one of the most, I think, important topics in the recent years. And just to give you like a sense of how important it is, as of today, if you look at Europe, there are basically, in terms of money, so assets under management, so these are basically funds which have financial assets, and they invest in all sorts of different instruments, financial instruments, as well as equity, in order to produce returns for its owners. As of today, 50% of all of assets under management are ESG linked. And what is meant by ESG linked? It means such financings or investments either have very specific ESG covenants, or they have an agreement to have the covenants, or they're being used for the purpose of something which has a very strong ESG link. So it's either environmental strong link, so it's either environmental improvement or social improvement or governance. The expectation is that by 2035, so just in 15 years from today, 99% of all assets under management will have ESG framework. So it's an incredibly important topic. And it's not just important because of reporting, but it's also important, of course, because we need to think about our children and generations which will follow us. So that's why indeed, like now is a really, really good time to start working on that. And I can say that we as Deutsche Bank, of course, we have our own targets. We have incredibly a strong framework as well as work, as well as kind of efforts dedicated to this topic. And what we have been already doing quite a lot, obviously, first of all, we have our own instruments linked to ESG issues, I mean, our credit instruments, but we also work very actively with all our clients who are at different stages on the ESG journey, but try to help them also to develop their own policies, to work on energy transition strategies, to work on various elements of ESG strategies. And this is something I was was interesting for me to hear that indeed already so much has been done in Uzbekistan in that regard. So we would be very happy to be part of that as well if there is such an opportunity. With that, I'll stop. And of course, any questions, then I'm here. Thank you.
Ina, thank you very much for taking us through all of that. Particularly interesting about the ESG and also the fact that the renewables is one of the sectors that's probably growing fastest in Uzbekistan. And so even at the beginning of the reforms, they're starting with the end of the process in the sense that we're all coming to those renewable ideas and ESG ideas now at the same time. Thank you for that. We've actually run over time, but there have been some questions and I know people are keen to get the answers. So we're going to go move on to the Q&A session. And I'll try and keep this relatively brief. And I'd like to ask Bahrom Urmabekov first if he could answer two questions that's been posed. The first is from Jonah Lillis, who is, if I may call her that, the old lady of Central Asia. She's been reporting on there for as long as I can remember and writes for The Economist. And she was asking a question about privatization, specifically is the distribution part of the newly reformed electricity sector going to be opened up for sale. And Matthew Philippe from Électricité de France had a similar question, and he was asking if there are plans or intentions for future IPPs or privatization of the generating parts, which the EBRD said is the obvious part to sell, including the gas-fired TPPs and hydropower plants, are opportunities for foreign investors to get into both the distribution and the generating parts of the power sector. And if you can try and keep it short and sweet, because we don't want to run on too long. Bahrom, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the questions. So answering the first question on the privatization of the distribution companies, this will be considered, but not at this point, because we haven't done some of our homework yet. We need to issue this new law on electricity, then we need to introduce the retail market and stop the regional electric grids company from buying and selling electricity and operate as just grid owner distribution company, earning fees only for distribution. Mm-hmm. And only then we can consider whether the government will sell it or give it for private management or keep it as a government-owned company. So
and the generation part?
And on the generation part, currently F-class turbines make around 3.6 gigawatts. In the future, they need to become around 15 gigawatts. And all the growth we're hoping will happen by the private investments. And this 3.6 can be sold or could be kept by the government to address some of the contingent situations in the power production. It's like
do you have any sort of time frame when the privatizations might begin?
They might begin already by the introduction of the wholesale market, because if those F-class turbine plants are privatized, then they need to be part of the wholesale market. So that's going, since we're planning the wholesale market to be up and running in 3-4 years. So I think this matter will be settled, should be settled starting, should start being considered in 2-3 years.
Okay, I have another question for you, but first I'd like to say to Ina Oleg, who needs to leave, thank you very much for your comments and insights, and that if anybody has questions with her or wants to follow up, then please email us and we'll put you in touch. Coming back to you, Tabakaram, another question we had was that there's been discussions about building a nuclear power station, and of course Rosatom has been extremely active in exporting its nuclear technology. The Belarusian nuclear power station went online briefly this week, and I know that there's been talks, but can you tell us at what stage those talks are, if there's a prospect of a nuclear power station in Uzbekistan anytime soon?
As you might know, there is an agency called Uzatom created for the development of nuclear power in Uzbekistan, and under the leadership of Uzatom, there is currently feasibility studies being conducted. So we're not over yet. So when these studies are completed, there will be analysis of the results, including not just the environmental aspect, but the safety and economic aspects. And then further developments will happen. So let's wait and see how the feasibility studies will end.
So this is a sort of later stage in the whole LNG sector development plan.
Yes.
Thank you very much. If I could switch to the minister, Mr. Narmatov, I have two more questions here. The first, again, from Jonah, asking about the PSAs that the ambassador mentioned in the beginning. Is there any timeline for the adaptation of legislations to support PSAs that will be made public? If
Yes, thank you very much for the question. The draft of the legislation, changes to the legislation have been submitted to the Senate, and it's now being reviewed, and I'm sure they will come back with comments, and it will work on finalizing the draft, and we were hoping at the beginning of the year that we will complete it by the end of 2020. But now I can only forecast that it might be the Q1 2021, and there is the law will be publicly available on the website. So, which means that we'll publicly announce all the terms and conditions for PSA in
and the rest of the regulations covering IPPs and PPPs, I mean, that's already in place and finalized?
The PPPs are in the progress, right, Bahram?
Yes.
They're all in the progress because we are moving very dynamically, and certain processes that were supposed to be developed as a evolution chain, you know what I mean? First, we were supposed to create the PPPs and the PPA terms and conditions. We agree we had to do that prior to bringing the investment, but unfortunately, not unfortunately, but we decided to move very quickly and skip certain stages. Thus, we decided to do certain things in parallel. So the process in parallel, but we're agreeing, but we're now looking at case by case and trying to stick to the same formula on everything, which leads us to completing the PPPs and other laws based on the recommendations of international financial institutions.
On that note, I'd actually like to wrap up and say thank you very much to the panelists for participating. That was very interesting. As I say, one of the most exciting areas of reform in Uzbekistan, which itself is one of the most exciting stories in all our patches. And to remind you, you can keep up to date with the news in Uzbekistan on our website, BNE, IntelliNews.com, where we report on it daily. And also to remind you that if any of you who are in the audience would like to follow up, ask questions, or get more information, then please email us and we will be happy to do that. So once again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It was a pleasure.